Welcome to the Fishing Daily podcast with me, Oliver McBride. Today I'm joined by Patrick Murphy from the Irish South and West Fish Producers Organisation. We'll be talking about the Seafood Sector Task Force report, and we will also be talking about the Maynooth report. Welcome, Patrick.
Delighted to be talking to you again. And
good.
So yeah, the topic that you brought up is a very serious topic. It's good and bad within it, but it's good for us to be able to have these conversations that people have a reference to look and see, what's happening outside there. We had a meeting in Kilmore-Key now with Patrick McLaughlin, deputy from the Sinn Féin party. We did so because they showed a huge interest in the industry above in Dublin when he brought across a lot of the heavy hitters from the party to see our documentary, that which I believe led us to this task force and had a huge impact on the way that the task force developed, because we explained by going to Dublin and by going to Cork that we showed that boats didn't want to decommission. Like, these boats are fantastic boats. Lads have put their heart and soul into them. They spent a fortune in them, and they bought them that they'd be there, to not only see themselves out, but that the next generation, their families would take on the boats and make a living from them for themselves. So it wasn't just bought for one generation, it was bought for several generations. So the message clearly from the flotillas was no decommissioning, no handouts, But the task force was set up, and we've discussed the three principal areas of that: burden sharing, the review of the common fishery policy, and then the final one was the financial instruments there to help the industry in a time of crisis now, because regardless of whether we get fish back, not our burden sharing, the industry is suffering as it is. And they've less fish to catch, less profits, more hardship, put maintenance and everything on the long finger, trying to reduce crew sizes, work harder, and this has huge implications right across the industry. We've seen with we'll be talking about it later on with the Atypical scheme, and we're battling on all fronts on this. It's tough, but for the task force, the headline would be that we've got 400 million plus coming into the country. Now, that's what we've put in for right across the sectors, from building piers, processors, fishing boats, tie-up schemes, inshore, everybody, aquaculture as well. It's a huge industry where we could develop. So that's the good news. The sad news is that there was a decommissioning scheme set up, proposals put in. We in the Irish South West couldn't agree with the terms and conditions, and I'll explain some of them. So look, for anybody to be told that if they bought into the industry with the last 4 or 5 years and it cost them, and they could show this, that it cost them 15,000 plus per GT on average to get into the industry, and now they're being told that, well, the maximum we're going to give you is 12,000, and that's the maximum. It could be as low as 9. And this is from a starting point of 6,500 per GT. So people always ask the POs, what have you done? What are you doing? What is the benefits of the POs? Like, these are the benefits. We still have to keep fighting. But if we weren't at the table, you can be assured the documents would have come out at 6,500 per GT, and they would be able to validate that and pass payments. But the boats are nothing like the ones in the past. And all they have to do is pick up a picture book and they'll see that. The boats that are out there now are modern vessels, with Wi-Fi and ship-to-shore communications that people wouldn't have dreamed about when I was a young fella, And all this is huge cost. The regulations that people have to meet and the different agencies they have to satisfy, the code of practice that are outside there. These boats have to be maintained at the highest standard, and rightly so, because lives depend on it. But there's a huge cost to this. So then to turn around then and devalue them, and just to put it in context, I suppose people are fed up of hearing my changes in voices, but this is really crazy stuff. We're getting 63 million, okay, that's the budget, to decommission what they're hoping for, 60 boats, 8,000 GTs. It doesn't take a mathematician to work out, multiply 8,000 by 12, that's 96 million. So there's already a shortfall if we're going to hit the maximum. Plus, And that's at 12,000, right? But like an easier way of working this out, 63 million divided by 60, it's 1,050,000. To be honest with you, that's an insult to these lads. This is their livelihoods. We've put it out in our documentary that these boats are like their homes because they spend way more time of their lives inside these boats away from their families. It's like a part of them. And not only now are they being expected to give them up and their livelihoods and their businesses, they're to do it at the cut rate price. And so for people to understand this, and they really have to understand what's going on, right? We lost 50 million worth of fish every year, forever, of actual fish landed on the pier. In 20 years, that's €1 billion in 20 years. I'm in the industry 35, so in my time, that's $1.5 billion. And our people are telling us, right, to compensate us for that. We get 63 million, a one-off payment. Now, if anybody is in business and they said, listen, we can take out a third of the fleet, and I mean a third now, right, because the targets, we know now what boats they're looking for to take out of the fleet. And there's 180 in that category. So if you're taking out 60 out of that category, it's a third. It's 1 in 3. So it's worse than I was saying at the protests. And this is the reality of it. So for ourselves in industry to sign up to this, somebody has to ask the question, why? Why did the industry and the people in that task force decide to go for those figures? No, the Irish South and West said the minimum should be 15,000. Absolute bare bones minimum. That's not to allow for the losses of the industry, the businesses going forward. The goodwill is what normally people pay for this. And it certainly doesn't allow for the loss of earnings now for 5 years, right? Because the rule is that you can get back into the industry after 5 years. But like, even to try and get back into the industry, I'm hoping that if this does happen, that this will be the last, that they'll never again hear the word decommissioning be mentioned in this country by our politicians, by Europe, by anybody. So that if this, no matter how many boats leaves the fleet this time, whether it is 5, 10, 15, 20, or the 60 they're looking for, never again should this country be asked to decommission. When we have only 15% of the pie, we have the richest waters in Europe. We have 29% of the waters being given to Europe. And even if the fish aren't in our waters, it's where they come to breed. And those fish move, as we keep hearing from Europe. Fish don't recognize borders. So we're the place where it all starts. This is where the fish come to breed and spawn and create the next generation. And they move into other territories and other waters, just like fish from other waters move in here, just like the mackerel. So we see in international law that that's recognized. But in European law, it's not. It goes back to a crazy historical catch rates. So at the meeting yesterday, we were going through some of the statistics that are there, you know, like, and when you show up the pie charts that are inside the stock book from the marine industry, you have to squint and look to see where's the green in most of the stocks. Now, there are the exceptions to that. But when you look at the total allowable catch, Ireland has the greatest share of very little, you know. So like there's very little to be caught in those stocks. So the monetary value of it is crazy. That's why you see a discrepancy between the amount of fish you're allowed to catch and the value of the fish. We don't even get a greater share of the most valuable of the fish. Like sole, for instance, in F&G, we've something like 50 tons for the year. Other countries have hundreds. And we are contributing 29% of the waters. And one country, we won't name them now, has less than 1%. It doesn't even register on the graph of the countries that are providing waters to the EU. In the statistic, they're not there. It's zero. And like, this is the craziness of the situation, you know?
Back a couple of months ago, you did an interview with me and you said it was a master and slave situation. And I know there's a few people who got very uptight about when you use that term, but the Irish fishing fleet has been sacrificed once again. in order for our betters in Europe to keep their fishing at their standard, and that doesn't seem to be really fair, does it?
No, what else would you call it? Like master and slave, of course it is. It's our resource. It's off our coastline. So here's the question: if Ireland left the EU, right, would we be treated the same as the UK? That's a simple question. Of course, we'd have to be. If we became a coastal state in the morning, we'd have sovereignty over our waters. Do you think that we should allow these boats to keep coming in and catching multiples of our catch in our waters? Not at all. Look, we know how important it is to gain access to the European Union. And it is a trading bloc where we can sell our products. But who says it's okay to sacrifice one section of our economy for the betterment of others? You know, this is like going back to people standing at the top of a volcano and making sacrifices and throwing some poor sod into the volcano to appease the gods. This is the facts of it, like. And they've admitted to this, Oliver. The commissioner admitted to this above, in front of us in Killybegs. He explained the comment that I can't pronounce her name. Anyway, she's the head of DG Mara, said, when I asked for her to be sacked, she said the reason why Ireland got hammered the most was the proximity, right? But she didn't explain the proximity. It wasn't the country, it was the fish. So the proximity of Ireland's fish to the UK, which was of most benefit to them on the side, so acknowledging it was our fish. So when you look at the facts of this, she acknowledged in that statement, and so did the commissioner, that our proximity, our fish, was the reason why we paid so much, because they were our fish, because they were the stocks we were heavily dependent on. So the common fishery policy was thrown out under their own admission. And nobody's picking up on this. Nobody from the media. Why? Because we're the sacrificial lamb. And it drives me insane why people can't see this. Our Irish people, as I said, there has been wars fought throughout history for less. This is the crack, like. So people in this country should be absolutely enraged at what's happening here. It doesn't matter that it's only a few fishermen. They're Irish citizens the same as everybody else. And I've kept saying this, and I'll keep saying it. Once they're done with the fishermen, they'll move on to the next target group. And they've been identified. It's the farming community of our country, right? They've already, with the blink of an eye, went through the corporation tax. So everything we fought for the last 15 years, we'll say, about being sovereign in our corporation tax, has just been thrown out the window. And because our Minister for Finance said, oh, we feel it's better for the country. I know that man was elected as a TD, and I know his peers elected him and to go into the next tier of it with the Taoiseach. They voted for the Taoiseach, and the Taoiseach appointed him as a minister. But all said and done, he's the same as anybody else in this country. Like,
you have elected a TD to go and do your bidding in the Dáil, and that's as simple as that. But they seem to have an attitude that they are making decisions in the best interest of Ireland, but it's not in the best interest of the citizens.
No, it's and you see, this is my graw with this, like, and anybody that speaks out, then they target your name or your reputation, or they get people to vote against you, right? And that's my problem. So, like, anything that I've said now on this, if people agree with what I'm saying and about the valuation of the vote, there has to be a question. Why didn't it not pass? Why did it pass the task force? How were they able to sign off on that? Why did everybody else agree that we could undervalue our fleet? And the people that had paid into the fleet, which we proved, this wasn't conjecture now. This wasn't, an assumption. We proved it. We gave examples, and they acknowledged those examples. And it's in the report that they acknowledged those examples. So you see on one side of the fence, where you see a third of the fish being lost by 23 vessels. A third of their fish. And yet it's not deemed necessary to decommission one of those vessels. Not one. they've lost a third. And that third is around, it is, there's no around, it's more than 10% of the entire earnings of our country's earnings. So we were on 250 million. This is what the minister presented to the Dáil before he went out to Brussels last year in November. And the figures are very easy to understand. There was 252 million presented to the Dáil going out in November to the December Council before the kiss off on the 24th of December, out of a pot, right, out of the pie of 1.6 billion. Okay? So we lost 50 million of that. And as people keep reminding everybody else that one certain sector of the country lost the most, they lost 25 million, right? That's 10%. But the 25 million becomes more than 10% when we're only left with 200 million. So if they've lost 25 million of that, it's 12.5%. From 23 vessels, that amount of money and no decommissioning. Yet on the other side, it's a case of, well, we have to decommission these boats, right? 60 of them for the third time.
But 60, they don't understand. 60, it's not 60 boats that's going, it's 60 skippers that's losing their jobs. It's what, 4 or 5 crew men, every boat that's losing their job. Communities are being affected, so it's a larger, more heavier impact.
This is hundreds of jobs, Oliver, hundreds. Do people not get this? You see, there's 2 skippers to every boat. There's 6 and 7 crew in these vessels. But these vessels are like, as was described in our documentary, the little Pfizers around their coastline. They're the nucleus inside the small harbours and ports where they're in. They're the industry that everything else is built upon, right? If you've 2 boats coming in, you've €1,000 worth of grub going on board those boats immediately, every week when they're going fishing. There's 8 families being supported on a weekly basis from them. You know, the coffee shop spouts up around them. You know, the tourism comes down to see the boats. There's the little shops, there's the engineers. All these people are living inside in the community. And they're enough to develop the community around them to bring people in. And the way I describe this is this. If you're ever going on a night out and you go into a bar, right? And you walk in and you're the only person walking into the bar, the first thing you'll do is have a look up and down and you'll turn around and you'll leave, right? Because there's nobody inside in the bar. You don't want to be just sitting at the counter. You might as well stay at home, right? So you go to a bar where there's a few people, there's a bit of life. We're killing that life in our coastal communities. Not everywhere, but in enough places to damage the fabric of our coastal communities by taking out these 60 boats. It's absolute crazy then to be doing this and asking you to take a cut price for doing it, to force it on these people. Listen, you have to go, right? You have no choice here. This is not voluntary. Anybody that tells me this is voluntary is talking nonsense, and they're telling lies, right? Because they know it. Because the instruments that are there now to crucify a boat, if he catches 10 or 12 boxes over and above what he's allowed to catch on the docket, he's arrested, €50,000 for fine, and he's criminalised. There's no other industry operating under those circumstances inside the country. As I said, and I described this, imagine putting a quota on a farmer planting anything inside in his field. If the field produces more than he was allowed to produce, instead of him raising his hands to God and saying thank you for the bumper harvest, he gets arrested and criminalised and his crop gets taken off him. That's the way it's applied to a fisherman. He goes out and he shoots his nets, right? And he tries his best. There's selector panels. There's more pieces of gear now designed to let fish escape and not catch fish in the fishing gear than there is to catch it. And people have to understand that. The technology is being devised to try and stop fishermen from catching fish. So they're trying to eliminate the ones with the small quotas, and they're doing their best. But every fish that is let go away or get out of the net is a loss of income to these lads. You don't see that in any other industry.
Well, an example of it's the way fishermen have to operate is Article 27 of the Common Fisheries Policy versus the landing obligation. We just discussed at the North Western Waters Advisory Council a couple of weeks back, and it says If you catch too much of one fish, that's not your designated catch, and you go over your percentage allowed for that, then you're going to get punished. But yet now, at the same time, the landing obligation means that you have to land those fish. Like, where's the sense in those rules?
But the only people that apply those rules are Ireland. Do you hear of any other countries in trouble with that? They either have so much quota they can't catch it and they won't share it. You know, the only ones that apply those rules, in my view, is Ireland. And the reason why they apply it is the system that we operate. And like throughout the year, we don't give out opportunities to what the boats can catch and the fish that are on the ground. We give it out we're like accountants. We cut down the quota and we say, well, there won't be enough there towards the end of the year. And like that's evident. Anybody that wants to look at this can see it. So like, why do we keep varying the amount of quantity of fish that we give out every year? No other business would do that. The only way we do that is to mitigate the amount of overshoots and whatever fish can be caught by the end of the year. That's why you see in the last couple of months now we're giving away higher quotas in some species than others because the boats didn't catch them. So now we just increase it like crazy. Whereas boats are ringing me up and they're saying, sure, I could have caught that fish in May or June. That's when the fish were there. Why didn't you give it to me then? Sure, I couldn't give it to you then because if you caught it then, we might run out and we'd be choked. We had a scenario where Belgium, right, were running out of kilowatt days, right? So there's another way of gaining access into waters, and it's on the engine power, right? We have it with our BSA crab, and we have to go cap in hand to the French, imagine, to the French in our own waters, so we can get lower boats to keep catching crab and non-quoted species. And last year, we gave them 180 ton of mackerel for very little kilowatt days in our own water. So Belgium are the same now. They're after building 7 new boats. An average price is 7 million. Like we're decommissioning boats, right? With 29% of the water. Belgium are building brand new boats and sending them over here. When our fellas get out the way and decommissioned, they're able to fish away here. How is that a common fishery policy? This is back to colonialism again. That only happens during colonial times. You know, this is the reality. But the problem is, mainstream media isn't covering this because fishing has been decided to be the sacrificial lamb. And what we do is we'll take away their good name and their reputation. Like I said at the start of this, this is what happens. So they'll vilify me or my industry to say, don't listen to these guys, you can't trust them. They're out there and they're raping the seas, they're overfishing, they're killing all the fish, they're destroying the grounds, they're greedy whores, they're mistreating their crew. Then you see they don't have to cover the reality of what's happening there. They don't talk about any other crews in other countries. They don't do an evaluation to see, well, why is it different in Ireland than other countries? Why do we have to bring in crews from all over the world? Do other countries do it? Is it only specific to Ireland? And sure, that's bullshit. Excuse the language. You know, like this is crazy stuff. But my questions here is to the people that's watching this. Look at the representatives. Look at who's making these decisions. I keep getting contacted. The POs are doing nothing and the POs are doing this and they're all negative stuff. Why is that? Like, this drives me insane. We were discussing this at the outset, you know, what we do to stay sane. And I told you, you're a valuable release to myself to be able to say about this, and hopefully people will hear about it. Because I'm telling the truth here. I'm not embellishing any of what I'm saying here. This can all be proven and fact-checked and shown. And we're constantly trying to get this message out to the general public, not just the fishermen. Like, just to settle down now on this, right? I'd ask anybody watching this to tell me that somebody who's worked all their lives, risked their lives, looked after 7 or 8 people throughout their lives, has a boat now worth a few bob, is perfectly capable of doing the job. It's a business that they can hand on to the next generation if they want it, are now selling out for below cost. So somebody has to explain why that is happening, because I've explained it and I mustn't be explaining it correctly. So the people watching this have to look at this a little closer, put aside any preconceptions and evaluate this as it says. Because when history looks back at this, they're going to be scratching their head and they're going to be, how did we agree to this? Why did Ireland agree to giving up billions of euros for 63 million at a stage in their history to wipe out a third of the boats between 15 and 24 meters. That's the target area. Why would we do it when we have the richest fishing grounds in Europe? Like, it doesn't make sense. And we have to try and stop what's happening. It really does.
If it was oil, if it was oil and say, well, not so much now these days, right? But we're looking at this here and a way that we're saying that we had like a big bank of oil out there, right? And the European Union said, the French has so much of it, and the Spanish have so much of it, and everybody else has so much of it, right? And Ireland has a little bit of it. And then to turn around and say to us, actually, do you know what? Because there's global warming and everything else out there, what we're going to do is we're going to take more oil from these other guys, and we're going to cut your oil down in order to save the world. And that's nearly what it sounds like. They're going like, you know, what you're doing is not worth it. You know, you may as well give up.
But it's not may as well give up. It's like, it's telling you that if you do send the boats out there, right, and we're going to take the clocks that measure the oil coming on board your boat, and when you get in, we'll use our own ways of measuring the oil. And if you've more than we say you're allowed to have, we're going to take it off you. So it's worse. You see, it's what you're saying now is correct, but you have to add in the extra bits to reach the reason of why we're saying, oh Jesus, we have to give up. So because they have the power to rig the game to destroy you later on if you don't get out now. That's why fishermen, it's not voluntary. And that's what the media aren't reporting on, you know, because they don't want to. It's easier to vilify because somebody's telling them to do that. They have to be.
Well, another thing that's confused me, we're taking out 60 boats out of the industry, right? And they're telling us, the report says it's going to free up 38 million euros worth of fish for other boats. You know, where's the balance in that?
Well, you see, the way they're calculating that is they've looked at what the boats are landing, and on average, these boats in the different sectors. And they're saying that these boats are landing 38 million worth of fish. If they're no longer landing it, that 38 million worth of fish will be still left in the sea. And the other boats then will have the opportunity, the last 120 will have the opportunity then to catch that. So their increase will be 38 million. But like, just think of it this way, right? 38 million. People might think that's a lot of money. But when you divide that out between 120 people, it's not a hell of a lot, is it?
It's not very
so like,
much, no.
And here's the thing, if 38 million, right, will keep 128 boats or 120 boats going, then they've already shown that if we go for 20 million, it'll keep the other 60 going. So if you divide it out, you know, in proportion, like if that's enough to keep them going, well, it goes the same for the opposite. So we're refusing to go to Brussels to ask, just to be on the safe side, let's ask for 30 million. I can tell them the species that we need to go looking for and the reasons why we can get it. And yet we won't go there. So it's better, as you said at the start, to obey our masters in Europe, right? Take the silver shilling from them now, wipe out the future of our fishing communities. And it is the future we're talking about here, right? Wipe that out, take the 63 million and go away and be done with you. And there's still no guarantee that in a year's time or 2 years' time or 5 years' time or 10 years' time, we'll be back having this conversation again. And the reason why I say this is we've already had 2 decommissioning schemes. In 2006, according to a report from the Marine Institute, right, there was 280 live vessels on the register for over 18. There was 50 on the register from 15 to 18. In 2017, when they did the report, they based the facts on the report, the 15 to 18 meters went to 18 vessels, right? And the over 18 meters went to 165. Now, I know for a fact we've lost at least 2 vessels since then, right? So I think it's down to around 160, I'd say, with boats, you know, off the register and stuff like that. And that's all we have as a country, the richest waters. Now, the atlas that the scientists and the government produce, right, says that there's 500 boats fishing at any one time inside Ireland's waters in those categories. So if you take the 180 out of that, there's 320 other boats fishing here. Now, one of them are going to be decommissioned. So we're going to go down to 120, and they'll have 320. They'll have 3 times the vessels fishing in our water. But sure, there's no wonder that they do when they have 85% of the pie that we're allowed to take from, and we've only 15%. Sure, it makes common sense that they would have that. But that's back to colonialism again. This is them saying, we're going to send our fleet over to catch the fish in your waters, because we were doing it years ago. We've signed a deal now to allow us to continue to do this. And that's the same, as I said previously, in the colonial times, going to Ghana or going to the African countries and reverting back to history to an agreement that was signed. And they say, well, now you have to honour this and we have to keep it going, even though it's going to be detrimental to your communities, even though people are going to go out of jobs, even though you're going to have less food to feed your populations. But there's no changing this.
Well, the EU is doing the same in the Indian Ocean and off Africa, where they've made agreements with ex-colonies, and they're going in fishing tuna, yellowfin tuna, whatever it is in the Indian Ocean, and it is really affecting the local population because their communities are being affected by the fact that they have these massive fleets off their coastlines, and Ireland's situation is not really much different to that.
No, it's worse because it's the same with bluefin tuna here as well. It's the same thing. The tuna populations are increasing. They're swimming around our shores and they're gobbling up our own fish that we're trying to catch. You see, the only way we can get more fish, as you know, Oliver, is that if the stocks rebound and go up, everybody gets an increase. That'll never happen if you have an invasive species coming in gobbling up the fish. No other country, if this was happening in France or anywhere else, you can be sure the laws will be changed very quickly to protect what they own in their waters. These guys would be hammered. They'd be taken out by the new time. They'd be paying fellas to go out and catch them. Whereas in our country, we're not even allowed to ask because we're being told by our department, we'd have to give something back in return. Can you imagine? This is when we look at the common fishery policy, it was designed at a certain time under a certain set of circumstances. And for any country to say that they didn't get good value out of that over the years, they're telling lies. But now that with the other instruments that were brought into the common fishery policy, which was to protect the coastal communities most dependent on it, well, Jesus Christ, I'd have no problem accepting this if I saw a third of the Spanish fleet, the French fleet, the Belgian fleet, the Dutch fleet, the Danish fleet, all having to lose a third of their vessels in that category, the same as us, and take the same money as we're being offered. Then it's a level playing pitch. You think that'll happen? Not in your navy. Why? Because, again, we have weak representation going out there, people that just will not make these arguments. And am I mad in pointing these things out? Of course not. What I am saying is true. And the reason why we're where we are is because the people aren't hearing our story, because they can't believe it. Because if I had this conversation with somebody inside the street, they'd say, that's a terrible thing. But they don't want to register it because they'd have to act. And that's why I'm fearful that's what's happening in our industry now. People are afraid to act. They're afraid it'll get worse. They're afraid they'll be targeted. They're afraid they'll be the ones forced out of the industry because there's a massive stick out there. And we all know what that stick is.
Well, speaking now, you don't seem to have a lot of confidence in things going ahead in the future. Do you think the minister will get us a burden sharing agreement, or do you have confidence?
Not at all. And the reason why, sure, it was on your podcast, it was on your own site, where the Danish ministry came out and they said they swatted Ireland like a fly off the table. Then when Ireland came in looking for access for more mackerel and burden sharing, their ministers laughed at us. This is on the backdrop, right, that the scientists say that 73% of the mackerel are born and grown and reared inside in between the Bay of Biscay up along the Irish coastline up to Shetland. So this is where the fish originate from. And they are attributing 3% of the mackerel stock to the North Sea, that it's been fished out. Yet they keep their rights there with a huge amounts of fish. And we didn't ask them to give them to us. We asked them to pay their fair share to the UK TCA deal, which would alleviate and give us some fish back. And we were told, what are you asking this for? So we had a minister and the department that couldn't make that argument. Where's his press release? Why didn't he come out? Why didn't he go to the commissioner? Is there no mechanism that when a country has been treated in such a manner that there's somewhere that they can bring this, like the European Court of Justice?
And just one last question. Common Fisheries Policy Review, I haven't had a chance to speak to you about that. The Commissioner's decision that we're not going to have a full reform of it in 2022, we're going to have a review of it in 2022. It doesn't look good. I was asking, we see improvements for the Irish fishing industry from it. Is this something they've sat down and went, you know what, it isn't working? But it doesn't seem to be that way, is it?
Do you know what, Oliver? Somebody said to me the other day, they were watching some interviews and said, geez, Patrick, you're after calming down an awful lot. But unfortunately, I'm not, because I keep interrupting you, so I do apologise. So if it comes out, people are watching this. But like, it's not just passion, it's frustration, you know? Like a blind man could see this, and I can't understand why the people that are there can't see it, see what's actually happening. So like, you know, you're asking about the review. Yes, we were told this and insulted by this above in Dublin, or in Killybegs, but we turned it on him. There was going to be nothing first. There wasn't even going to be a review. It was going to be a report on the common fishery policy. So we got it as far as a review. I do believe that if there's a document brought out in Brussels, and if we put the right information forward and they accept it, we will insist on that to go to the people of Europe to see what is being done in their name. And see, do they agree? Because we can't get our own media here to tell the Irish people. So we're hoping that it'll happen in Europe. And then, at least what we have, despite the crucifixion of our industry, the annihilation of our industry, I believe that after the decommissioning scheme, and there will be one, they're not going to roll back on it, like they'll never admit they're wrong. And that's not just the department, that's several others. So it will go ahead, right? I have no doubt in that. Now, to what measure, I don't know. It depends on the fear and the circumstance of the individual that's being forced, and other parameters that I don't want to speak of here now until it happens. We'll revisit it later on, right? So the Common Fishery Policy Review is really critical and important for Ireland to get the right information, to put the best case forward, and to make sure that at least it's on the record, just like we're doing here, that people will be able to see it and read it, and it'll be there, and nobody will be able to deny that it ever happened or didn't happen, or they had a misconception of it. So we have to put the facts outside there that's written in the scientific journals themselves and show up what it means because of what they say in law. Law is law, and in the Common Fishery Policy, right, law, it says you have to protect the coastal communities that are most heavily dependent on it. Now, if somebody says that the communities in Ireland of an island nation aren't dependent on fishing, then who is? We are cut off from Europe. We are an island nation with the richest fishing grounds. All the other fleets are coming to us to catch fish. We have 15% of a pie that's 85%. And that isn't enough. And if they want to stand by their own documentation, they have to review the Common Fishery Policy and see where they can reallocate fish to a country, right, from another country that isn't catching that fish. So that stands to reason. And I believe that evidence is there throughout the years. And we'll use the porcupine for an example. We swap out other fish that we don't have, by the way. We could catch it ourselves, but we find the porcupine is a way more valuable for our fleet because, in fairness, most of the fleet is prawn specific, right? That's where they make the most of their bread and butter. That's why it was so shocking that the vast majority of the boats, when they lost the prawns, to me, that was a way more detrimental to the 23 in the RSW, because none of them are being decommissioned. So case in point, right? And that's not picking on those lads, right? They've invested an awful lot of money in their industry. They've bought these big, huge, massive boats for millions and millions of euros. And of course, they're afraid they'll lose them now because they won't have enough fish to cover the costs of them. So I'm well aware of this, you know. It might mean that they might have to hold on to those boats for an extra 5-10 years, you know, and I understand the ramifications of that. You know, I'm not stupid, business is business. But at the same time, the prawn boats can't afford to lose anything. There's no meat on the bones there, they're gone. So in the Porcupine, we have around 40 to 50 boats going there now, and they're heavily dependent on that part of the fishery. So for the last number of years that I've been there, we've been swapping out fish. And the only reason we've been able to swap out fish there is because the other countries aren't catching it. So if the other countries aren't catching it, that means their coastal communities aren't dependent on it like we are. So there's one area that can show there has to be a reform of the common fishery policy. And that's not taking into account all the other additional data that has changed and the movement of fish, like I say, about bluefin tuna coming into our waters and eating the stocks that we heavily depend on. They're not going into Danish waters and eating the fish up there. They're eating ours. But the Danish aren't giving more fish from up there to us to mitigate the damage that's being done by these fish, or the Spanish or the French. So there has to be a review of the common fishery policy, because this is bigger than the sum of its parts. If you look at a holistic approach to this and take all that new data in and look at it properly with proper independent views, you will see that there's less fish and less opportunities now for the Irish people, right, than there was when the common fishery policy was formed. And I give you another example, cod. You know, in the areas where we had a bit of extra fish more than everybody else, but the cod has gone down, but it hasn't been replaced with anything else to protect our coastal communities. So the review of the common fishery policy. So our access to the UK waters, you know, rock on, right? That's where Ireland was traditionally catching millions and millions worth of fish. The others weren't catching it above there. So that dramatically affected us more than anybody else. And again, back into protecting our coastal communities, that then has to be built into the review of the common fishery policy. So if we've lost that fish and nobody has lost any other fish, then we've been more affected than anybody else. So if there is a common fishery policy that is to protect the coastal communities of Europe, then surely that is built in to the review of the common fishery policy, because everything has changed. Now, we in the Irish South and West have been saying this for the last 5 years. We've been screaming it. And we asked and begged their minister to look at other reasons rather than just going with the other fellas, putting all our eggs in the one basket and saying, oh, we'll be okay, we'll stick together and that'll solve the problem. It certainly did not. We were hammered. And where are our friends now? Gone. Just like the Danes said, gave us the 2 fingers, but insulted us as well. You know, this is the reality. This is what the Commissioner for Fisheries in Europe has to look at. And if he doesn't look at it, we're back to the colonialism again. Oh, we're keeping what we have. Doesn't matter if your communities are put out of business. What we'll do is we'll throw you 60 million there, and that'll pay them off, and go away and be a quiet boy and shut up. Or else we'll bait you with the laws that we have in Europe and force you out anyway. And the Irish people have to understand what's going on here. Just because they're not doing it with a gun and an army, they're still doing it. They're still taking away our natural resources and putting our people out of business. And we're accepting it.
For a government, successive governments have claimed that we have a very, very high standing within our European neighbours. It doesn't really look like that on the ground.
Look like it. There's no evidence of that.
There's no evidence.
Our farmers are being targeted. Like, show us where. So our corporation tax has been taken away, our rights to govern our corporation tax. All the laws that are being brought in are being written by Europe. They're not being written by ours here. You might as well have a county council above the iron rather than a government. Sure, even our own Taoiseach admitted to that. Sovereignty is no longer important. But the Irish people have to catch up with this. And they can't be kept in fear that, oh, if we leave the European Union, we'll be like the UK, we'll lose this, we'll lose that, we'll lose this. You're already losing it. And before you know it, what you have will be lost. And then you'll be in some pickle. Because what will happen then, you'll be like a third world country because you'll have billions and billions and billions and billions of euros in debt. Do you think they're going to wipe them off? What's going to happen then? Look, I know the importance of Europe, but we cannot allow Europe to dictate to us and destroy our indigenous people's industries and businesses. That's what Europe shouldn't stand for. And I believe if the media took a hold of this and said it around Europe, just like the French who marched down the streets to tackle their own president about the mistreatment of them, would stand up for us as well. And I'm coming back to this point, Oliver. I'm not asking the French fishermen to give up fish. I'm asking them to give us the fish they're not catching under Uniclass law. I'm asking the Belgians who are not catching their fish to give it to us under Uniclass law. So I'm going to give another example of that here now, right? The Belgian fleet have increased their effort in Irish waters. So they ran out of the right to come here in around October, and they needed extra kilowatt days to fish Irish waters, right? So we traditionally have swapped out swaps with them. And this year, we changed the traditional stocks that we were asking for, and we asked for ones that we were stuck for, stocks that they have. And instead, they decided that, oh, you're not agreeing to what we want. We'll say now that, you know, we can't trust you after years of doing business, and we'll do a deal with the French instead. But here's the nastiness of this. So we were offering, they offered us 16 ton of haddock and 10 ton of monk for the kilowatt days, 100,000 kilowatt days, right? Now, to me, 16 ton of haddock is probably worth 10 ton of monk, right, in monetary values. So to make it easy, that's 20 ton of monk they were offering. Yet, for the same kilowatt days, for access to our waters, which the French had plenty of, imagine, and the Spanish, okay? So they went to the Spanish and they said, can we have some kilowatt days in Ireland's water, please? And the Spanish said, no problem, but they wanted 200 ton of monk, 200 ton. Now, remember, we were getting 20 ton. They didn't accept what we asked for changing one of those species to sole, even though they had plenty of it. And they did the swap with Spain instead. So when I challenged this and brought it up inside our department, I was told a range of different reasons for it. I won't say excuses, reasons for it, and how we have it corrected, right? And there's going to be a new representative going out to meet with the Belgians. And I said, great, we'll keep the same ratio now as they have with the created with the Spanish, which is around 10 euros per kilowatt, right? Because the monk is worth, we'll say, 1 million, 100,000, easy to divide it out, 10 euros a kilo, or 10, right? Okay, so 10 euros per kilowatt, right? 5 euros a kilo, sorry. So I said we use that ratio and we go looking for the fish that we have. And I was told no. I said, why not? Because they felt they were under the gun with Spain and they had to agree it, and we wouldn't do the same. I see a reaction. What is the reaction of anybody else that's listening to this? This is the truth now. And when I rose this and said it was crazy, I was actually because they used the wrong word. I said, by what they did and the words they used, it was like an apology. So in that, they admitted that they had wrong done, and they wanted to put it right, and that's why we should keep the same ratio. I was absolutely attacked by the department official for using the word apology, and how dare I even suggest it? So I changed. I said, okay, maybe apology is a strong word. Maybe it's remorse or an acknowledgement of what they had done was not correct. I didn't even get that. Oh, we have to keep friends with these people. Like, where else would you hear of that if you went back in history? Is it the ordinary man suffering on the street is saying it? Or the fella that's paid inside in the buildings to look after the rights of the other fellas to keep down the ordinary person? That's where you'd hear it from. That's the reality. That's why I said that I don't have faith in the people that are charged with going out to Brussels to fight for us. Because I don't think they have it in them to fight. I don't think they're going out there with the right mentality. I think it's the opposite. I think they go out and they feel they must be grateful to Europe. I'm not grateful to Europe for what they've done to us in our fishing industry. I'm enraged. I'm absolutely beside myself with rage. And they should pay.
It's the Irish thing. It's being the doormat. You know, it's lying down. It's letting your betters, you know, don't ever stand up or don't ever shout because they're better than you. You know, we better not fall out with them, because if we fall out with them, we'll look bad, and we don't want to look bad, because if we do that, then, you know, they're going to hit us and we can't be hit and blah blah blah. You know yourself.
I thought we lost that inferior complex when our sportsmen and sportswomen have performed so brilliantly in all the sports around the world. You know, we've seen a rugby team go to the top, become ranked #1 in the world in that sport. We see you see, I know the lads around my area in West Cork. I know the two of them. One of those lads is friends with my son. I know the father working in the boatyard, worked alongside him, Teddy Donovan, and they became gold medalists at the Olympics. They have won gold at international. So I have no inferior complex any longer as an Irishman. You know, we've seen our hockey players rise to the top. We have plenty of examples within our own country. Even McGregor, right, rose to the top of his profession. And look what he's done at the top of his profession. We have Irish people going all over the world, being the best at what they go into, whatever industry or profession they go into. We see Ireland leading the charge at the top of the table. So I don't agree with that mentality going forward. And you're right. If somebody has that mentality, they should step aside, because they're not the right person for the job. So no more cap in hand now bowing to our masters in Europe. This is our waters. We have 29% of the European waters. This is their statistics. And there is no way, and I'm not asking to put Belgian fishermen, French fishermen, or any other fishermen out of business. I'm asking for a fair share of the fish that they can afford to give to Ireland to protect our coastal communities and the fishermen that risk their lives going to sea to do this. I see nothing wrong with that, and I will never make an apology for that or speaking out like that. And if somebody else does, they should get out of the job they're in.
Patrick, we need to move on to the Minute Report, Experiences of Non-EEA Workers in the Irish Fishing Industry report. What's your opinion of the report?
Do you know what the worst thing is disappointment. We have a third level institution and college that said that they went out and did a report on this and never spoke or looked to speak to anybody in industry. So I wouldn't call that report complete. I would call it biased. They didn't speak to any representatives in the industry or anybody of the employers in that group to see or give comment on it or their viewpoint or to see. And where did they go? They evaluated documentation online, but they didn't look for any documentation with an alternative view from anybody else outside of the ones that they look for. And there's plenty there. So just to explain this, Oliver, right?
Yeah.
We have a system that is acknowledged now that is not fit for purpose, right? And again, we're asking people to operate within that system, knowing that they can't operate within that system. Why? Because it's not fit for purpose. And as I've said, and this is going to be really quick. We have, every year we look at the television around Patrick's Day, and our leader of our country goes out to the leader, they call him the leader of the free world, the president of the United States. And one of the hot topics of discussion every single year is asking America to legalize the undocumented, the illegal Irish people working within the States. Every year, without fail. So here's my question. Should we change now what we're saying over there and say, by the way, Mr. President, we agree you're entitled to have your laws here about the non-documented, but not only should you kick out the Irish that are here now, that are illegally here, and deport them, but you should criminalize and crucify anybody who hires them. You should get third-level institutions to write reports about these people abusing and trafficking Irish people into the States. Because it's the same thing. These workers come from another outside the EU. They came into the country through a system that was designed by people in their own country. When there was allegations of abuse in this country, the industry said, we need to regularize and legalize these people coming in here. We need them on our boats to stay fishing. We are short of crew. They're a necessity and a huge requirement, and they're highly skilled, and we want this system. And then when they designed it, they kept the industry out of it. And we found out now that 4 or 5 years later, that the scheme they designed is not an atypical scheme, right? So they don't afford the rights of any other atypical scheme. So after 4 or 5 years of working within the atypical scheme, they can apply to leave it and look for a stamp 4 because they've contributed to the Irish economy for 5 years. So they gain rights from that, and they can either choose then to go to the boat owner and say, right, I want to stay working under this system, or I want to be treated the same as everybody else on board the boat because I know what it means to be a share fisherman. They're not given that right. They're not given the right when they're here that if they fall out with a boat owner, or they leave, or there's something on board the boat, or they run out of contract, or their passport expires, or whatever, for a whole myriad of reasons, they find themselves outside of the system, cannot apply to get back in, which we asked for. We asked for it to be extended to 3 years, the same as the other people, right? It wasn't listened to, you know? So we're crucifying people then that take these lads on, bring them in and treat them the exact same way as the other fishermen on board the boat, get them to sign a contract, get them to sign up to the ILO regulations, the Fisheries for the International Labour Convention, right? 188. So we formulated those rules that to meet the European Union signed up for, which should supersede. It's like an a la carte menu. Well, we'll choose now to follow the EU in this because we have to. We have to bring in penalty points, even though it doesn't marry with Irish law because the European Union does it. But we won't do it for these workers. So you have a crazy scenario that the system that's in place, the atypical scheme, treats these lads as if they were working on a factory floor, as if, you know, the bell rings, the bells turn on, and the product comes up, and after 4 hours they stop and take their break and whatever, and they can go home and jump into a bed at night. A fishing boat isn't like that. And these men are highly skilled, trained fishermen. So before they ever step on board the boat, they know what's coming. They know that a boat shoots a net and tows it for X amount of time on the ground. And when the fish comes up, they're hoping that that bag of fish is so full, they'll be working for the next 5 or 6 hours, because every single fish, as a share fisherman that they put down into the hold, they get a share of it. So you have the opposite then, where the scheme is expected to allow these fellas to go on board the boat and then work as a factory. It doesn't work that way, because what happens if 2 lads step off the deck, right? If they're on a different system, the work still has to be done. So you're doubling down on the hours of the other crew then outside, and they're not working together as a team and working on board a boat. And these fellas are out on a boat for a fortnight. Can you imagine if you were working in a scenario where you were working on the boat for 10 hours and you look to your right and your fellow colleague, your fellow fisherman, took off in and left you outside working away for 2 or 3 hours on your own, and he comes back out to you? Would you put your arm around him and say, I hope you had a lovely break now? I'm wrecked, but as long as you got your rest, we're good. You cannot have this system on board a boat. Everybody has to work together as a team. Each have their own individual jobs, as you know, and the different areas specializing on board the boat, from hauling to shooting to going down into the hold, putting away the fish, from gutting, washing the fish. Everybody has a specific job that they're trained in on board the boat. This is a highly technical industry outside in the water now to keep the fish at the pristine quality that it has to be to meet all the other standards under the hygiene, and to bring in that fish. You cannot leave fish on the deck for hours and say, well, we'll go in, we'll have a cup of tea now, and they're sloshing around inside the water. It doesn't work like that. You can't have a net out over the side inhibiting the movement of the ship. She could take it in the propeller. She's out of commission. You have to get that net in as fast as possible, and you have to get it back into the water. So all these ways of working aboard a boat is known by a fisherman. So anybody that goes on board a boat and says, well, I had to work long hours, he should never have stepped on board in the first place, because that is the nature of the beast. And there are plenty of days that you won't be working, and you'll have time off, or you won't catch fish, and you catch up in your sleep. And that's known within the industry. You cannot operate an industry that is change and has fluidity in its operation to tie it down to the same as a factory floor.
Anybody who has any knowledge of fishing has, from the moment you go down onto the pier until the moment you leave the pier, you're employed. You don't have what lunchtime.
9 to 5, yeah.
9 to 5. You don't have break times. You don't. It's not a typical working
environment. Absolutely no. But now to go back to the atypical scheme. When we said this scheme itself was not fit for purpose because it wasn't looking after the rights of these lads, not because the owner was having to pay more or pay less or whatever else. That's not the case, because an owner needs these lads to go to sea because there's crewing and manning regulations on board a boat, and you can't go to sea. You can't operate outside a vessel, as you know, without a full complement of crew. You have to have the right personnel and people on board, because if you go out short-handed, what will happen? The people on board the boat will say, you know what, feck this, we're off too. And then he has no crew, right? So a boat owner has to look after his crew, right? That's why they're coming in from foreign countries. There isn't enough crew there. So it's not in the best interests of the boats. So when the crew come to them and say, well, I see Johnny earning more money than me, the first thing he wants to do is rectify that. Of course he does, because he wants to keep everybody happy on board the boat, working productively, and they're making money so that it's shared out. But he's denied the opportunity to offering that man the same terms and conditions as the share fisherman on board. But he's denied it. It's not his fault. It's the atypical scheme's fault. But these lads mightn't understand that. I don't know the 24 people that were interviewed. And as I said, to anybody, if you walk into any building or business and walk around and interview all the employees, I can guarantee you will never get everybody in the building saying, God, this is a great job. I'm having a great time here. This is fantastic. Never want to leave it. So but crucify the boat owner who's been given the poisoned apple to work with. It's crazy when that person has been screaming through me for the last 5 years to fix it. And instead, there was a working group formed with all the different agencies. And here's the madness of it. In the past year, I got one of those participants to agree that it wasn't fit for purpose, but it was somebody else's responsibility. It wasn't theirs. And I said, well, that's fair enough for the first meeting. But every meeting afterwards, you're now part of the collective responsibility to fix what's broken or to raise these issues. Otherwise, why have a working group? That's the simplicity of this. So we went to the politicians, we told them this isn't fit for purpose, and we told them what was coming. So now there's 180 people in the fleet. Were these 24 picked at random? Who picked them? Who paid for the report? The ITF, Mr. O'Brien. Now here's the thing. I've asked Mr. O'Brien in emails to join with me, and we'd work together to try and better the rights of these lads, because otherwise the only alternative is go around, find any of these lads who don't have a contract, put them on a plane and send them home, because they're illegal and they need to be deported, because that's the only other alternative. And if that's what the ITF want, they should state it, and they should be asking for these lads to be sent home because they're illegal. You cannot want one man saying, well, he's acting illegally, he's not doing the right thing, so we need to crucify him, and then ignore the other legal requirements. So you either follow the law or you don't follow the law. It's not an a la carte. You can't pick and choose. And this is why I said to the ITF, this is what will happen. You're going to end up sending these poor lads home. You'll be forcing the government's hand to deport these lads out of the country because the scheme isn't fit for purpose, as you know and I know. But instead, it's always target the other person who's also the victim in this, the boat owner, and blame him. You know, like there was one report that a fella was thrown out over the side and that there was abuses in the Irish industry. But they don't clarify whether that's an Irish boat or Northern Ireland boat operator. But we're the ones that get targeted by these people. And what they are doing is reprehensible, to be honest. But nobody's looking into what they're doing with these lads after they come in contact with them or if a case is taken. So somebody should be, Minute didn't cover that. There was no questions asked of the other side of what their involvement in this was and what's their process and how do they act when somebody comes to them, as they say, with a complaint. What do they do?
Well, the report is funded by the ITF.
Yes.
And you think going forward that any such reports that's coming out about whatever industry, it shouldn't just be funded by one side. The other side should be approached for funding too, so that their input is equally heard. Because it's very easy to create a report that's just one-sided.
Yeah, but you see, but the report was only in one direction as well too. Was only directed at the how these people were mistreated by who? By the boat owners. It didn't actually say that it alluded to it, and they said, and in the interviews on the television by the report writer, that they were in danger of being mistreated by not being documented. They were in a precarious position, and that they could be taken advantage of. Then that's what the report said. Like, then it rehashed all the other testimony and fellas coming up and saying what they want, but that's not credible. That's hearsay, right? They're reporting on what somebody said. Sure, anybody could say something in an interview. There could be a myriad of reasons for that. Like, you could have a lad that went on board a boat and had a falling out with his crew members. He mightn't be happy. Who's to say that what he's saying is credible? I'm not saying it's not credible, but who's to say it is credible? Where's the evidence? So, in other words, right, now if somebody said of the 24 on one particular boat, there was 6 or 7 of them, and it's consistent and everybody is abused, then you really need to look at that, right? But these could have been isolated incidents, and the question has to be asked, why is only one of them coming forward? Where's the rest of the lads?
Well, it's like this here. A report isn't factual. I don't think it should be taken as being factual. The only time that anything ever can be credible is when it's taken into a court of law and the evidence, all the evidence is heard and produced, and then people can go, right, this is all the facts in front of me, and I can make a judgment on it now.
Yeah, but you see, Oliver, even with that now, right? So it's the interpretation of the atypical scheme. So the way it's being interpreted by the WRC is it's not under the ILO Fisheries Convention 188. They can't be treated the same. So to give an example, in that you can give fishermen time off in lieu of working hours. So in other words, say a fisherman, the boat goes out for the week, right? And of course, it might work beyond the 8 hours per day, right? And it could maybe work 12. And that happens, you know that. So next week you say, well, you're off now the next trip, and we're going to balance your hours. We're going to pay you for both weeks, but we're going to balance the hours, so you're going to get paid to be off. That's what's allowed under the 188. As long as they're looked after and they're properly paid, that's the way it is. But the atypical scheme doesn't allow that. You have to pay him for the hours of work. And even if he isn't working next week due to bad weather or he wants time off, whatever else, you have to pay him for that as well. That's the way the scheme is designed. It's not specific for the fishing industry. It's not fit for purpose. That's what they keep saying. And that's not me saying it now. That's the WRC. So the scheme wasn't designed for the purpose it was meant to be designed. It was only designed to legalize and regularize the men that were in this country. And it was men, I don't think there was any women. at that stage, and or no. So that's what happened. And we've been saying this for 5 years. And that has come to light as reality now because they're not afforded the same rights as any other person that came from these countries in under the atypical schemes. So in the other atypical schemes, again, if you work and pay your taxes and everything else, after 5 years, you can apply for citizenship and you can leave the schemes and work independent of the schemes because you've the same rights as everybody else. Then you can leave the industry, you can go somewhere else. You don't have to work in the fishing industry. You're entitled then to go looking for employment in Ireland. You have the rights. It's a visa to work in Ireland, right? That's what happens. And I've asked this question: how many men who have attained either citizenship through marriage or become Irish citizens or whatever else turned around to the skipper and said, well, I still want to be in the atypical scheme because it's better for me rather than going on a share basis? Where was that in the report? To show was the atypical scheme the way to go? Or were the workers feeling that the scheme itself is what was mistreating them, or was it the owner? Like, if they went to the owner and then said, well, no, I want to share the same as Burtonport, and said, oh, you're staying on the atypical scheme, and then they abused the system that was there, fair enough. Do you know what I mean? Then there is abuses in the industry, and I wouldn't condone that. You know what I mean? Then he should be excluded from the atypical scheme and never again getting back into it. But like, we had this discussion with the Navy above at the Oireachtas committee years ago, and when we were asked up there as witness experts, and an infringement, right? All these and the WRC is down to paperwork. Do you know what I mean? Or down to not keeping hours, or not writing it into the logbook, or having some fellas were asked, "Where's your green card? Where's your passport?" I don't have it. Where is it? 'Tis ashore. Oh, well, you're meant to have your green card on you at all times. There's an infringement. Well, was that the skipper or the crewman's fault? Do you know what I mean? Where there were infringements. Now, if they were legal infringements, why did they prosecute? Could be some going out to have the WRC taking these workers into a courtroom saying, well, you're meant to have the green card on you, so now we're prosecuting you. That would go down well, wouldn't it? Of course they wouldn't do that. But it's the same. So I'm a fisherman, right? If I went to, say, Scotland, right, and I was living on the boat, okay, living on the boat like these lads do, they save a lot of money. They're here to make money for their families, right? So they cut the cost as much as possible. So say I was living on the boat, but I needed my passport and specific papers, right? I wouldn't take them to sea with me. I'd give them to the boat owner or the skipper, and I'd say, put them away safe, because if something happens, knowing the industry I'm in, I'd lose my papers as well. It'd be, it'd be even worse. So at least I'd have them safe. But if once these lads do it, then they're told, oh, that's the skipper holding on to their papers, threatening them that they're holding on to them, they won't give them back, they won't let them go to the country. It's construed in a different way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like, that's easy for somebody to make that allegation. But they haven't interviewed the skipper to see is that the case. So you're guilty, again, on the balance of probabilities rather than the burden of proof. And this is what happens in these reports. People read the report and they look at the headlines and they go down a couple of paragraphs. They say, oh, it's terrible what's being done to these lads. But who's doing it to them? Is it the scheme itself, or is it the boat owner?
Well, Patrick, it's always been a pleasure speaking to you. And
no problem,
we'll have a catch up again. And
yes,
we'll see where this decommissioning scheme is going. And hopefully we'll have some word back on the typical work scheme that would need improving.
Well, the good news now to finish on that, we'll try and finish on a positive note. Myself and Brendan Byrne are putting together terms of reference for designing the new atypical scheme. And hopefully our politicians will take that, move on with it. John Tatton in Ballycotton and Johnny Walsh and Martin Deasy are three men that are in constant contact with me because these have these lads on board, right? And they're fed up with the negative publicity. Not the three men, their crews. And they've had enough as well. So, and the Irish South and West are going to set up an organisation within our organisation, right, to give crews a voice, to set up a committee, because they too are fed up and they're reporting to us. And they said, well, we can't let you speak for us anymore because they don't believe you. So we'll have to start speaking for ourselves. So we're going to assist the crews of the vessels within the Irish South and West to give them a voice. So maybe we'll get one of the lads to talk to you there later on when or ladies. It's an equals, yeah. So there will be full representation hopefully on this, and we're looking for atypical workers, lads, to come into this as well too. So hopefully we might do a piece with that with you later on.
Anytime at all, Patrick. All the
Okay.
best.
Cheers, Oliver. Thanks. Bye bye.